Hey, so welcome to another podcast episode of the Soulful Side of Life with me, Ally Portee. I hope that you're well and having a good week. And I'm really looking forward to this podcast episode, or rather, I enjoyed the conversation with Beth Solomon. I met Beth around 2017 when I was working in DC and she was working at CARE, an international aid organization. And CARE would partner with various embassies around DC and put on events. And Beth would invite me, and I would cover the events for my online magazine, Zayla. And I knew I wanted to talk to Beth about the Trump administration's cut and dismantling of sorts of USAID and aid, a foreign aid, independent organization that was set up by President John F. Kennedy. And Beth had a lot to say. A little bit about Beth. She began her career as a radio reporter in East Africa for Voice of America. And as a freelance producer for ABC News, she covered the fall of the Berlin Wall and the first democratic elections in Eastern Europe after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Beth went on from there to take on a role in strategic communications at the National Association of Manufacturers, the International Franchise Association, and the National Restaurant Association. She's a graduate of Yale University. She is a fellow history major like me, and she worked as a speechwriter for U.S. Senator Sam Nunn from Georgia. And she spent 4 years as an executive search professional and worked in Hollywood, which I didn't know that. She worked in Hollywood at the talent agency William Morris Endeavor, and then as a managing director for strategic initiatives and development at CARE International. Um, and the great thing about Beth is that she's multifaceted. Beth has books that she has written, one called Georgetown Dish and From Fired to Fabulous, which are both available on Amazon. And I'll include links with this episode description. But yeah, enjoy this podcast episode where Beth and I discuss and we share our own personal views and convictions about the cutting of U.S. foreign aid and what she thinks it means and where she thinks the U.S. is headed at the moment. And yeah, I hope that you're inspired and enlightened by this discussion. So, Beth, thank you so much for joining my podcast.
Thanks for having me, Allie. It's good to see you again. It's been too long.
It has been too long. I knew you from Washington, D.C. when you were working at CARE and all of the great work that you all were doing then. And the purpose of this podcast is to talk about the closure of USAID and your thoughts on that. But before jumping into it, can you talk about your expertise in the international aid arena and why it's a passion area for you?
Absolutely. Well, I'm really glad to talk about this. It's such an important topic having to do with our country's identity and our reputation, our history, our success around the world. My own background is more political. I mean, I started in journalism and then I worked in the United States Senate. I worked for Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia, and he was chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. So this was kind of a lot of exposure for me to international relations. I had spent time as a journalist in Kenya and then actually 2 years in Berlin when the Berlin Wall fell. So I've always had a passion for international affairs, and I was lucky enough to be hired by CARE, the global humanitarian organization, really to spearhead the Washington communication and kind of strategic initiatives efforts there, and that is really helping people understand in Congress and in the media and in the public, and certainly in the diplomatic community, in the business community, why humanitarian and development aid by the United States is important. And so that was my job there. And of course, in good jobs, you learn a lot, and I learned so much. I was just remembering that my first trip with CARE actually was to Gaza and the West Bank. We stayed in Jerusalem for a couple of weeks, visiting projects in those areas where women um, were being supported to launch small businesses, basically, and small farms were being supported. Um, and that trip also then included going to Jordan and the refugee camps where the Syrian refugees were. And so it was a fascinating introduction to this world. And it really made me realize, I think, which is the main point, that the amount of money that the United States used to spend on USAID was really pennies on the dollar of what we spend on our national security. And most military leaders felt like these were the best investment we could make as a country, not just on humanitarian grounds, but on national security grounds. That if you try to ignore the world, that problems then will show up on our doorstep. And so, from a humanitarian perspective or a moral perspective, what's the right thing to do as the wealthiest country on earth, the largest, wealthiest country on earth, and also from a practical standpoint, that these investments were so important. And of course, and now basically all of that has stopped.
Yeah. It's quite, before getting more into that, did you study politics or international relations?
I studied history, and
Okay.
of course, history is politics and um, uh, sociology and all those things. It's the story of what's happened in the past. And I was always also doing journalism on the side. I wrote for the Yale Daily News, and I wrote for a Connecticut women's magazine. So I always was doing journalism kind of as part of my education.
I find it interesting that when you have the opportunity to go and be in these places where there's conflict, that you learn things and see things that you can't learn in a classroom. And it opens your eyes, I think, to the reality because a lot of times what's happening on the ground isn't what's always being reported in the media. And so did you find that by being on the ground in a lot of these places, it furthered your conviction that foreign aid by the US is very important?
Absolutely. And like you say, when you're reading news reports, you're getting it's almost like a cartoon. Uh, the amount of information you get is just reduced to so little that it it almost becomes a cartoon. I mean, when you're on the ground in a country, whether it's Germany or the occupied territories or Ghana, you see an entirely different and much richer picture. And what I saw in my travels for CARE was how such small amounts of support made huge differences in people's lives. And I remember one senator who was a big supporter of CARE, Senator Van Hollen of Maryland, he had been a Peace Corps volunteer, and he told the story of this was in I think the 70s or the 80s when he served as a young person, and he said he talked about these little mud huts somewhere in Africa, and he would walk in and there would be a portrait of John F. Kennedy on the wall. And that so by these very small investments, you think about the Peace Corps, where we're sending a young person into to live in a village, doing some kind of work that's needed, education or helping with agricultural practices. It costs almost nothing for the US government, for the taxpayers to do that, but the effects are huge. And so I think it's just it's very sad. Of course, the estimates are that tens of thousands of lives have been lost by cutting funding for, HIV and AIDS treatment, medical care, vaccinations, that literally at least tens of thousands of lives have probably already been lost. But it's so cold-hearted by this country. I think shutting down USAID from a budget perspective is sort of a nothing. It was more of a psychological warfare against this idea that this is, the deep state and the liberal elite. Well, so I think actually shutting down USAID by this administration really had nothing to do with budgets or anything practical. I think it was more like a psychological attack on a rather esoteric. That's why they could get away with it. It's not like cutting food stamps. They're like the the real victims of the cuts don't have a voice. I mean, you're never going to hear from the small farmer in Ghana or Zambia who can't send her kids to school now, or whose daughter has to be sold into marriage because that's the way it's done there. You're never going to hear that voice criticizing these cuts in USAID, so it was easy to get away with and very, very short-sighted and really despicable.
Yeah, you've unpacked a lot there because, this was firstly led by Elon Musk with Doge, and he's no longer in the Trump administration. They've had their own disagreement issues, and I, I think Trump and Marco Rubio would say, in addition to their argument about budget cuts, it's about the corruption or mishandling of, yeah, money over the years by those overseeing USAID. Um, when I lived in Dubai, I have some Zimbabwean friends, and the husband likes to often talk to me as if I speak for the US government. I don't know. But he's like, the worst thing that the US did was give aid money to Zimbabwe. What was that leader that they had? I can't remember.
Mugabe?
Mugabe, yeah. And because he said that when he died, in his house was mounds of cash that of the aid money that the US had given for the country, and it never reached the people. So is there any sort of good argument that the Trump administration has that it has been corrupt and misusing of funds to get to the
Well,
people?
yeah, I that's a fair question. I mean, first of all, let me speak to what I saw, which was that CARE is a non-governmental organization. So USAID was actually funding its work through non-governmental organizations such as CARE, Save the Children, um, um, the World Food Program, etc. Specifically because of what you just talked about, that these non-governmental organizations, and I can speak to CARE, specifically kept a distance from many of these governments for exactly the reasons you just mentioned. I once spoke with a Ghanaian Uber driver who said, "I hope you're not giving any money to the Ghanaian government. It's corrupt." And I said, "No, no, actually, that's the way this works, is that
Mm.
the non-governmental U.S. supervised, I mean, when I say U.S., like Care USA organization, is working through its team. And by the way, at CARE, 80% of, I'm sorry, I think it was more like 90% of the staff of CARE internationally was working in his or her, their country of origin. So local people are the ones employed, not parachuting in. And that in CARE's model, the money, the support was focused on women and children because of the experience that if you give the support to women, it ends up
Mm.
going to pay for school. It ends up, actually making it all the way to the kids and doing kind of community development. So that was the care model. So this was specifically designed so that there was no money going through somebody's palace or somebody's Swiss bank accounts. Um, there's plenty of corruption out there, and I think the irony of the criticism of the Trump administration about corruption that through by USAID. I mean, when I saw what it took to get a USAID grant and the reporting that came after it,
Mm.
I'd never seen so much reporting or scrutiny of dollars. The irony is there's plenty of corruption out there. What is a gift of 400 an airplane to that is somehow off the books? You know, there's plenty of money going out the door from the United States government that um, is other kinds of payment. What is paying this CCOT prison to take our people? I mean, there's plenty of money going out the door that's enriching bad people, but I can tell you, by the time I worked at USAID, starting in 2017, I mean, that would be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to happen based on A, the small quantities of money we were talking about, and B, the amount of scrutiny and reporting that it took to get a USAID grant, which is how the USAID worked. It worked through these non-governmental organizations.
I'm wondering if these mounds of cash that dictators were sitting on, did that money come through the State Department? How does that work?
I
Because
think
maybe it
that's
didn't come from
Well, I
USAID.
think
Maybe.
that's a good point. I mean,
Yeah.
um, there's a lot of there's a lot of money that the U.S. government spends internationally. There's not a lot of money that USAID spent internationally. I mean, if you look at the budgets themselves, I remember I was in Ghana when the care team there, the country team got a 5-year, $50,000 grant to do community development, economic empowerment, and education in the northern part of Ghana, which is right on the edge of Chad and where a lot of that Islamic extremism is happening because it's such a tough place economically, and so radicalization happens in those areas where it's so hard to make a living, and climate change has often really disturbed the potential for agriculture. So anyway, this Care Ghana got a 5-year, $50,000 grant, meaning $10,000 a year for 5 years for this program. And you would think that they had just won like a $1 billion lottery. It was such a big deal. So that gives you an idea. If $10,000 per year to run a big program in Africa um, is a lot in that country, it gives you an idea of how much money we're really talking about. Um, to your larger point, you know, there's a lot of other money that some money we know about in terms of military aid and economic support, and a lot of it we don't know about. I mean, there's these, black side of budgets, national security budgets that, it's by design. The public doesn't know how
Mm.
that money is being spent.
Yeah, for sure. And I think President Kennedy, he created, Peace Corps and USAID as a response to, what was happening at that time, the Cold War. And um, I think that President Trump, if I had to guess, if he were president in 1960, he would have done the same thing because he's not a president about war and conflict. And Kennedy tried not to get involved in hot, you know, uh, in war hot issues. He tried to, yeah, be more of a cold president in terms of, yeah, not engaging. And giving aid, foreign aid is a good response to fighting your enemy and putting money in projects that can empower other people. And I think that President Trump, I just, there's a lot of Republicans who agree, even those who worked in USAID and the aid sphere who agree with Trump's decisions. But okay, if you take away, you dismantle USAID, you put 20% of what's left under the State Department, sometimes government bodies just don't understand you foreign aid. The way a government entity is going to run, the State Department, the way that it runs is not the way that an aid organization runs. And I wonder, I fear that the the aim of what USAID did may not get the needs won't get met and understood under a government entity office like
Well, keep
State
in
Department.
mind, I mean, it's not just moving money around. It was a stated policy. We don't believe in that. It's America first. Uh, you know, across the board, the Trump administration philosophy is not to engage. I mean, that's, you know, even cutting off, you know, visas for international students. So
Mm.
it's disengaged from the world. America first. The flip side of that coin is disengaged from the world. Except some like delusional ideas like, Putin, Trump, and Xi Jinping are gonna, shake hands and make the deal of the century. I mean, there's sort of a lot of like delusional conflicting ideas here, but the premise, I think, and why Trump Trump back in the early 60s when it was the Cold War, I mean, his view is we don't want to engage with the world. We don't need to. We don't. We will spend our money other ways. We want to get rid of a lot of immigrants. That's what we're doing. We don't want international students here. I mean, it's this xenophobic um, approach to the world, and tariffs are the same thing. To get into an oppositional, hostile posture, whether it's a negotiating tactic or or something else, or a replacement for income tax. It's a hostile attitude toward every country outside the United States. And this is what's so disturbing. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, but I think you know, whether the money is under the State Department or whether USAID is an independent agency, unfortunately, I think that's sort of like, you know, the house is on fire. Oh, do you want to turn off the oven before the
Mhm.
house burns down? I mean, it's unfortunately, and I do agree with, I think is what your premise is, Ally, that it's a step backward not to have an independent agency that understands, that is specifically about doing this kind of work well, and it's not easy to do well. I think if you look at the Gates Foundation or some of these, other
Private
respected organizations, it's really not easy to give aid out well for the very risks that you mentioned before. It takes a lot of oversight and I think expertise to do something useful.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
but so having an independent agency, and USAID was made an independent agency somewhere along the way. My father actually worked for a time for USAID, and it helps to have people who focus on development and aid and then become really good at it. Um, so I agree with you. I think the problem, though, is just so much bigger than the State Department managing it.
Mhm.
Although I think the State Department has been so turned upside down, where you have Marco Rubio negotiating with the people running the prison in El Salvador about you know or sending this Abrego Garcia to what used to be Swaziland, or because he refused Uganda. I mean, it's just so messed up.
Yeah.
And you're an international person. You're a person of the world, and as I do, being overseas, that thankfully, on a person-to-person basis, I don't feel that the actions of Trump or our government are being held against me personally. I don't feel that. But but we talk Trump comes up in every conversation, and I've even heard a Swedish Coast Guard guy say, "Well, I think Trump means well, but everything that comes out of his mouth is just silly. It's garbage." Well, that works for a while, but if our country's reputation is that of a destructive force, whether it's tariffs, whether it's really not doing anything to stop what's called a genocide in the Middle East, whether it's not reining in the most scary leader of Russia in our lifetimes, and just letting him again do a mass killing and destroying an independent country. I mean, if that becomes our reputation, I think it will change. And I also want to say here, I'm married to a German, and he started saying it a long time ago, and now many of my German relatives are saying it, that this is the pattern, this is the path that Hitler walked. It didn't start with the Holocaust and shipping, Jews to concentration camp. It started with uh, um, um, trying to silence the media, trying
Yeah.
to silence universities, silence anyone who is your critic. And then you start to, it's a snowball effect. You eliminate dissent, you eliminate anyone who disagrees with you. You militarize, or you turn our U.S. military resources against civilians. I mean, this is all reminiscent of the night of Hitler's 1930s Germany, and the cuts to USAID were just the first the first thing out of the box that he did, and then it's just gotten worse from there.
Yeah. Well, he only has 3 years left, so but a lot can happen in 3 years. I'm curious though, a couple of last things. If you had been in the rooms when Elon Musk and Trump were having these discussions about closing USAID, what would you have said? What would have been your dissenting voice to what they were planning to do?
I would say listen to the military leaders and say, you don't have to believe in the moral aspect of it. Um, Listen to the military leaders tell you that it practically speaking, it's the best investment in our national security, dollar for dollar, that's out there. And it's similar to, you know, I once talked with the police chief of Washington, D.C., Kathy Lanier,
Mhm.
and she said, and she was a broken record on this. She said, "Please, if you want to do something about crime long term, invest in the Boys and Girls Clubs, invest in after school programs, because once we're dealing with it as a crime problem, it's much more expensive. People get hurt, and it's a huge waste of blood and treasure. And when if we don't, what the military leaders say is not taking these steps to um, prevent extremism from taking hold, anti-Americanism, that we pay for it in much bigger numbers down the road with military action. So that's what I would have said. I think what they were doing was more symbolic. It was because the numbers are minuscule. Um,
Mhm.
uh, on relatively speaking. So I think it was more symbolic to say, no, we're not doing any of this, foreign assistance, international development. No, no, no. That's not what we're about. That we're about America first. And unfortunately, America first uh, can become America alone, and then
Mhm.
America the bad guy, and I think we're
Yeah.
really on that path.
I think it would also help if Trump would have had a close advisor who has spent time in the trenches of foreign aid, because we often don't understand something because we haven't been exposed to it. And that would have helped also Elon Musk to be exposed to somebody who could be like, and even somebody who agrees with their policy and politics, but who's been in the trenches, to be like, actually, I remember this in 1970 or this in the 90s. If you take out money here, what's going to happen is XYZ. Um, it would have been nice, I feel, if they would have replaced it or found a different solution. I just feel like it was a complete closing down of something that is needed, and don't completely do away with it, maybe just overhaul.
Well,
And
ironically, I mean, Marco Rubio is a big supporter and a friend of CARE. Lindsey
uh,
Graham, the same. I
yeah,
think he's quite close to the president, certainly in some ways. It was said when I worked for CARE that without Lindsey Graham, there would be no international family planning funded by USAID, that Lindsey Graham was just a big believer in that.
yeah.
But that was never said publicly. So I do think those people were there. But the problem when you can't stand any dissent or disagreement with you is that those people who could offer you that wisdom, maybe they keep their mouth shut.
That's unfortunate. Yeah, because the way that our president operates is, I guess he has to have the last word. And not too much a challenge to the decisions that he makes, which, ah, yeah, it's so many things that have happened this year, other decisions that he's made, and I'm like, wow, this really affects. Like, what's the number? 300,000 or is it 60,000 Black women have lost jobs in the last 4 months or so. And yeah, I know there's corruption with DEI. I know there is. And it's kind of like that argument with affirmative action. Is that fair? Is that right? But, I think for people of color, for Black people, if you don't have these kinds of programs or initiatives there, we get overlooked. But I don't know, just overhaul it or okay, DEI is there or USAID is there, then come in with your policies on how to but don't let these groups get overlooked because it really does affect lives, because the numbers, let's see, a study done by the Lancet, a medical journal, estimated that USAID prevented the death of 90 plus million people, and it's predicted that 14 million deaths could occur by 2030. And these are astounding.
Yes, and um, extreme poverty was cut in half in the last 25 years. So we're in extreme poverty. I mean, so yeah, you threw the baby out with the bathwater. I completely agree with you. And I was struck by to your point about overlooking groups or how we think about other human beings. I was struck by Brett Kavanaugh's um, ruling about um, recently about whether you can be arrested for speaking Spanish, uh, having brown skin, and working a menial job, which in his words are reasonable grounds for suspecting that somebody is an illegal immigrant. All right, well, that means we're a racist country now. I mean, so to your point, at what point do we sort of hit the tipping point of we're going backward? I mean, the statistic you just mentioned, but also we're dehumanizing we're dehumanizing people
Mm.
because of the color of their skin, their culture, the job that they have. And this is extremely dangerous. And Allie, I know they're just maybe 3 years. I hope so. But what comes next? I feel like we haven't. It's so hard to absorb it all. I mean, I can tell you're kind of a news junkie. You're very well informed. I am too. But I think it's just really hard to get your head around what's happening on so many fronts, and I think most Americans, they're not there yet.
No, they're not, and we don't know what the future holds, the recent death of, Charlie Kirk, it could ignite, a stronger MAGA movement. Because up until like a month ago, people were saying that Trump has lost control of his MAGA base with how he's been handling Epstein. But when you have deaths like Charlie Kirk, it could reignite. And I think Republicans are split about the MAGA movement, but the policies of what MAGA believes, they do make decisions where people get overlooked. There are some maybe good things with the MAGA movement, but what I feel as a Black woman, having so many Black women lose jobs, it's hard to be a woman in this world. I'm not trying to make excuses. It's hard to be a Black woman in the US in this world and just trying to live. We also need to buy bread for our kitchen and soap for our bathrooms. And when we're getting pushed out of jobs or like USAID or yeah, USAID cuts, it does affect lives. These are human beings that are being pushed back. And this requires the president or any president who is going to decide to come in and change things around. If you completely turn off a thing or eradicate a thing, I don't think that's the solution. I think you've got to revamp it then.
Well,
If you
he does
cannot.
wanna go back to sort of a 1950s America. I mean, Trump does very clear about it, where the man is in charge, women woman is at home raising kids. I mean, I saw a statistic the other day that of the 45%, let's see, men, it's young men between the ages of, or people between the ages of like 24 to 36. The males overwhelmingly support Trump, and the women overwhelmingly don't. And also the males in that group, they ask them, what's the ultimate goal of life? Like, what's would be your biggest accomplishment in life? And those men who support Trump overwhelmingly said that that is having children, that having a family, having children is like your ultimate success in life. Whereas the women said it's having a career. So,
Mm, mm,
the 1950s was an extremely racist
mhm.
period in our country. I mean, this was, where blacks had to use different bathrooms. You're not allowed in the restaurant. I mean, go to the back of the bus, all that stuff. And I think he's been very clear, like, we want to go right back there where manufacturing was king, and um, go right back there. And he Trump doesn't say that, but I mean, um, it's it's very clear from the policies.
That he's making. Yeah, I was a Trump supporter, and I feel like a lot of Trump supporters are in the last few months have become just disillusioned, even in the Hollywood world. The projects that are being funded in the journalism lifestyle world, so many people have lost their jobs. We see Vogue, you know, they're only going to under this new, creative or head of content, they're gonna put out a certain amount of issues a year. Everything is just being slimmed down with cuts and people losing jobs, and, the Trump tariffs don't help the fashion industry as well. And
It's
if
a
I
culture
ever
war.
had yeah, and if I ever had the opportunity to speak to him, I would just say, I was supported you, and I feel a little, not a little bit, I just feel a disappointment by some of the things that you're making because a lot of people, the decisions that you have made, do affect lives. And I wish that there would have been something better that you could have maybe, instead of eradicating things, just come up with different solutions. Because, even President Bush, and I know a lot of MAGA people don't like to talk about George W. Bush. They see him as a neocon and that he betrayed the party. But even him and President Obama have criticized USAID cuts because they get that, and they come from putting out policies that impacted whether it was AIDS with PEPFAR and different programs. They get it. President Trump has come from the business world, and these are very different views of life. I think when he's coming from that New York real estate world versus, someone like an Obama or a Bush who maybe had a better understanding of the international field from their college years on up. So, yeah.
Also, yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I doubt Trump has seen a lot of, poverty. overseas. I mean, he's into building luxury hotels. He wants to, Gaza becomes the Riviera, you know, um, I I think you're right. I think it starts with exposure but Obama certainly in with his upbringing in Indonesia and his father was Kenyan and George W. Bush, I mean his father George H.W. Bush was
In
a
China.
very seasoned international leader for the US government. And so I think you're right. I think that it just starts with a lack of exposure, but I do think there's a culture war going on. It's no accident that um, it's it's dark people who are being targeted in the immigration crackdown. I mean, there are no immigrants. They basically reduced the amount of immigrants we will be accepting in this country. They've shrunk it to almost nothing, and I think 90% of the people who are going to be let in are white South Africans. I mean, so I think it's a very deliberate um, uh, it's a very deliberate effort.
Do you think,
And
though, that something had to be done about a lot of these people from South America who are coming into the US and killing Americans and
I do. I
overtaking New York
do.
City?
I do. I think you would find across the board people believe our immigration system was broken. And something had to be done. And remember, Congress almost passed something. It was bipartisan in the Senate. I'm sure it wasn't perfect. Nothing is. But Trump turned against it, turned Republicans against it because it was just better to just be able to keep saying, oh yeah, we need to go get the killers. Of course, that's not what they're doing. They're getting the low-hanging fruit of people who show up for their immigration hearing.
Yeah.
So Allie, I mean, I think it's very deliberate, and that's the scary part. And I guess I can understand. I mean, that people thought, there I and there were the pendulum does swing far and then it needs to come back. And so, like you're saying, sure, I'm sure you could find waste, fraud, and abuse. And is our government perfect? No, not at all. I mean, was DEI perfect? Had it gone too far? I would argue in some ways, yes. But to your point, that doesn't mean you throw out the whole thing and like start a culture war to sort of take us back decades into a less equal America. I mean, but I don't think the intention was ever to fix it. I mean, Doge, uh, again, Doge's first move was to fire the most recent hires of the federal government because they didn't have long-term contracts yet. Well, who are the most recent hires? It's young people. It's
Mm.
people from the private sector. It's the like the ones we want, they were just hired. Well, they were the first ones fired because they were easy to fire. So I think, it's easy to take a wrecking ball to things. That's what worries me, like USAID. You just cancel it. Easy to destroy it, make everybody put their stuff in boxes, and you know, looks like a big upset, which I think was intentional. I mean, I
Mm.
think this White House is all about the visual, the optics,
Optics. Yeah.
and that's what they
The
wanted.
marketing.
It's yeah, marketing. But marketing what? America first? I'll tell you, the irony to me is Trump, and I was mostly worried about Trump um, because I was worried about the NATO alliance that he had so weakened it in the first term I mean, so I was really worried about that. Um, but now, I mean, that's like a tiny fraction of if you ask me, like what's going wrong and what's alarming.
Yeah.
Um, It's our entire, he's back to, he's a marketer, but the thing he's destroying is the brand of America. Like,
Yeah.
you know, are people gonna buy Harley Davidsons in Europe? I mean, tourism is way down. I think a lot
Yeah.
of these job losses in the hospitality sector in America are because Europeans aren't coming. Canadians already got burned. So he's
Yeah.
wrecking the American brand, which tells me, I mean, to your point, that maybe he never really understood it. He understands hotels. I think his hotels are beautiful. But how could he possibly understand international development? Well, how can anyone if you have no exposure to it? You just think poverty is something that losers have.
Yeah,
Um,
he's probably one of the few presidents who came in without being a lover of politics or understanding how government works. I don't know if there's been
that's a
another
very good point.
president that has come in without this was their thing, their game, their sports. And I think, there's pluses and minuses coming into it as an outsider, but a huge minus is that when you didn't grow up out of, high school, college, eating and breathing international relations and politics and being politically informed, you're going to make decisions that don't make sense. I mean, I know all presidents make decisions that don't make sense, but yeah, that just leave people behind without fully understanding the costs. And I would like, or I thought that Trump, or and I don't want to speak as if I know him, but I thought that he surrounded himself with people who don't know what, or knows what he doesn't know. And I've not seen one Black woman advisor around him. Uh,
He's only interested in people who agree with him, or
yeah.
people who have,
But
you
there's
know.
there's a lot of Black conservative-minded women out there, some who even spoke at the RNC, the convention. It would be great to have one of them in the West Wing with an office who can tell him, what's going on, what time it is with issues. I I think he has maybe a one or two Black male voices, but I'm coming to realize that Black Black men can't always represent Black women's issues. It's the same, probably also with
Absolutely.
white men and white women,
Absolutely.
and that
No
would make a huge
question.
difference if he had, some people in the that he could call on who could give him and tell him what time it is, with certain issues. But to wrap this up, one last question for you. It's kind of like two questions in one. But what character is needed to do international aid work? And then what advice would you have for a young person in university who's thinking, this is what I want to do? What advice would you give?
Absolutely. Well, I think if you have a passion for, the outside world, that for other countries, for other cultures, I mean, this and wanting to make a difference in people's lives. I mean, that's like the fuel, that's like the flame that never dies. And, um, I think, I mean, people come to it through ministry also, and, that's also good. I mean, to want to help other people. Um, I think now there's a lot of specific education that most people who go in that direction, that they pursue these master's degrees in, international development, because it has become quite a technical, very specific expertise. It's a profession. So my job was more on the political and communication side, and but most of people who do international development, they get educated in it, and I think there are excellent programs um, out there. I know at Tufts, at the University of Denver, I think the University of Texas has excellent programs too. So if I were a young person interested in it, I would be looking at those kinds of programs.
Gotcha. Well, Beth, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Allie. It's been great to catch up and talk about important things. And I just want to say, your voice is very, very important and unique. And I hope that you continue to focus on these kinds of big questions because we need your voice. You're open-minded, you are smart, you know how to express yourself. And those are skills that the world is desperate for now. So I want to just thank you for what you're doing and encourage you to keep asking questions and using your voice because that's what will make a better world.
Thank you so much for your words, Beth. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you.
I hope that you enjoyed this podcast episode and that you have found a soulful connection to the conversation. God bless you, and until the next episode, go bless somebody else.